Thank you so much for joining us. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Today's topic is collaborative governance, strategies for effective intergovernmental policy coordination. We have an amazing panel and a fantastic list of topic questions to get through today. Quick agenda, so we'll do speaker intros around the virtual room, and then we'll get to the topic questions. As we're going through, for the audience, feel free to drop questions in the chat. I know we got one before we just started, and we'll do our best to work those questions in either during our back and forth or as we get to the end of the webinar. Appreciate everyone for joining today on a steamy day in DC. With that, we'll jump in with intros and then get to our topic questions. Paul, you're the first person on my virtual left, so we'll start with an intro from you.
Okay, I think my mic is off now. Mic is on now.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much.
Gotcha.
Thank you for everybody for being on. And I want to thank Leadership Connect for the invitation. Michael and Tatiana and my friend Carson Lennon are great there. So we appreciate the opportunity and everything they do to help support us. So I'm Paul Kelly. I work with a lobbying firm here in town called the Livingston Group. It was founded by former Congressman Bob Livingston, who was appropriations chairman back in the 90s. And I joined them in 2018. I focus a lot on healthcare, not exclusively, but my clients tend to be in healthcare because all the way back to the 80s when I started, yikes, I always say when I think about that, but that I started working for health provider associations, trade associations, and I worked for 4 different trade associations in my career, including those representing chiropractors and dietitians and nutritionists and pharmacists and chain pharmacies and big retailers as well who have an interest in healthcare as a benefit, as you might expect, health insurance. So yeah, I've been on my own since 2012 as an independent lobbyist, working basically with those same types of groups. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paul. Sean Tipton with American Society for Reproductive Medicine.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. As Paul just was talking about professional organizations in medicine, that's the kind of group that I work for. So I am a full-time employee of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. We're the professional group whose members are physicians and other kinds of people involved in reproductive health care. I head up our policy and media affairs shop. Most of that work is focused on infertility care, mostly because we're the only ones in that space, and the rest of the kind of work that our members do, contraception and other kind of things, there's other groups involved in that, but we're really the only shop around for infertility issues. So this morning I was on the Hill for a press conference on some IVF legislation, for example.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Breaking the healthcare streak. Let's go to Derek Kitchen with Exim Bank.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks to everybody for being here today. I'm delighted to join Leadership Connect. Hopefully we have a good turnout. My name is Derek Kitchen, and I am a political appointee in the Biden-Harris administration. I am serving over at the Export-Import Bank, which is a very small 400-person federal agency where we finance global trade for American companies. I've been with the agency for a little over 1 year, where I have been running the Intergovernmental Affairs shop for Exim Bank. And so what I do is a lot of engagements with, of course, Congress, the House and the Senate, interagency partners at Commerce, State, Treasury, and of course the White House. And then over the last year, I've been building out a robust state and local engagement effort for the agency. We haven't really put a lot of effort into our governors and mayors over the last decade or so. In terms of background for myself, before joining the administration, I served 8 years in public office back in the state of Utah, Most recently, I was elected as a state senator, where I represented downtown Salt Lake City and a good chunk of Park City, which is a ski town in Utah. So obviously the state and local angle for the agency is a big priority of mine, given my background. I'm really excited to be here today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. In a past life, I worked on factoring, forfeiting, and letters of credit. So I appreciate what you guys do at the XMA.
Thrilling, right?
Awesome. Last but not least, Dr. Ray Serrano with the League of United Latin American Citizens.
Yeah, thank you again. Thanks for the invite to be on the panel here. It's a very long title. It's like League of United Latin American Citizens, but we were founded in 1929. So this year we're celebrating 95 years. And we have the way we have it, so we have basically 10 people, at least 10 people become one council. Some councils are up to 1,000 members. So we have about 140,000 members across the country and 535 councils and 500 in 33 states. So we're the largest and the oldest Latino civil rights organization in the U.S. And because of that, there's a lot of different issues that we kind of cover, from areas from like healthcare access, immigration, kind of education policy. So my role here at LULAC is basically in the capacity of research and policy. So I'm the director of research and policy. We have a little like teams of research fellows and kind of research staff that work on certain areas. I always joke that I'm the residential nerd of the office. I get stuck revising a lot of the manuscripts. My background is so my doctorate is in health services research and health economics. I've previously worked with the government at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid under HHS. And then before that, I actually worked, it was the World Health Organization. So I was working at the country office for the World Health Organization. So I kind of got a little bit of a flavor of what it means to be working in a multi-sectoral agency. So you have, obviously the World Health Organization, and just like LULAC, we have a national office, and there's state directors, and there's local councils. And just like the WHO has the national or the global office, and then the regional offices and country offices. So working at different levels, different priorities, trying to herd the cats. That's what I do.
Awesome. Thank you, Ray. And I'm Michael Crosby, CEO of Leadership Connect. We're a decision intelligence business. We work with about 1,200 clients, many of them in government, on helping them find the right people to connect with and manage their relationships. We love doing these webinars because we serve what we think of as a practitioner community, and a lot of the topics we cover are probably not a focus to kind of the main public sector media outlets of the world. So this is a great way for people to get a practitioner's perspective on what's important and best practices in the industry. So let's jump into the first topic, which is election prep. We've had to change some of the names in this question over the last couple of weeks, but we now know, I'm pretty sure we know who's going to be running for president, but there's 13 gubernatorial races. There's literally hundreds of down ballot races. So when you think for your organization, how are you prepping? There seems to be a couple strategies of just wait for the results. Let's not have the headache of trying to figure out who's going to win, who's going to lose. But others have been working on different scenarios of who wins, who loses, what that means from a policy perspective. So maybe Derek, you're in the administration, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's been an exciting news week for sure. Coming from the Biden-Harris administration, we're excited to see our vice president step forward with so much momentum. And so obviously we're hopeful that we will see a continuation in our policies and much of the personnel that have been appointed to this administration. But we expect with every new election that there will be changes. The Export-Import Bank, we have a congressionally mandated charter that gives us our authority and maps out how we operate. That charter is up for reauthorization in 2026. And so as I look forward to this election, I have to imagine that there will be changes in both the House and the Senate to members of Congress, of course, but also the makeup of some of these committees that, are really important to the operations for our agency. So I'm looking at the House Financial Services Committee, for example, and of course, the Senate Banking Committee. And so as you know, we can't prepare exactly. We don't know exactly who's going to be elected. We don't know what the results will be. But we can anticipate shifts in the membership and, of course, leadership in the House, perhaps. And so one thing that we have been doing at the Export-Import Bank has been just to make a real concerted effort to dig a little deeper with these members on our oversight committees and not only offer, the opportunity to sit down one-on-one and have a conversation about the agency itself, what our needs are, where we fit into the broader operations of the U.S. government, but really trying to make the case for why we are important. And most people don't wake up in the morning thinking about export credit or insurance for their products that they ship around the world. So we're oftentimes not the first thought for members of Congress. We come up when there's a problem, Boeing, for example, right? Or when we need our reauthorization every 5 to 7 years, depending on when we're authorized. And so, for us, it's a matter of ongoing effort to educate members about what we do and why we're important. And so that never really changes, but with the prospect of changing leadership with the upcoming election, we're just trying to game out who we expect might take up a ranking member position or who might be the chair of our committee, and really focusing on educating their staff. Obviously, when it comes to state and local elections, they matter, but less so when it comes to the jurisdiction of the bank itself. So we're just going to let the chips fall where they may. And then once we know who's elected, we will begin in earnest our outreach efforts to educate governors, mayors, and local elected officials about the Export-Import Bank. But we're not going to jump ahead of the elections on that matter.
All right, makes sense. So you're kind of judiciously, apportioning your resources to, probably more, congressional staff at this point.
Yeah, and I should note, our Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs is pretty small. We've got 3 employees. So, we have to be really careful with how we dedicate ourselves and who we decide to make outreach to. But, we're just, I try to engage all members of Congress. We send out a monthly, newsletter with, what activity we're doing in their district, which companies we've supported, things of that nature. Try to keep it, high level and out of politics as much as possible. But yeah, really trying to be focused on the members of the committee themselves.
Great. Paul, you bring a unique perspective in that you're representing clients, so you probably get to see a mix of strategies. Let's turn to you for your thoughts on this topic.
Sure, and I'll concur with a lot of what Derek said, but I think that we have an historic circumstance right now. It's been a heck of a 4 weeks, and there's like 103 days left till the election. So that's very much a tumultuous situation at the moment. So, but preparing the best you can is a good idea. And so I've worked, like I said, in trade associations, but also now with individual companies and groups. And in both circumstances, you get them as prepared as possible. So on the presidential level, it's certainly learn as much as we possibly can about the agenda, particularly in the healthcare world, that we're focused on, and learn as much as you can about that agenda and get prepared for whomever the eventual winner is and whoever the eventual administration is going to be. And so you're just not starting from ground zero. I frankly would not recommend that at all. I think you need to be prepared to hit the ground running once you know something with certainty about who the winner is. And similar to what Derek was saying, I mean, we got key committees in Congress, of course, that we care about. And I'm sure that Sean will agree, and Ray. I mean, in the healthcare world, there are basically 4 key committees in Congress, and there'll be a fair amount of turnover on each of them. And because of that, it's a very good idea to know who's coming back and who's not coming back, and you can start to talk to those folks and getting ready for what's to come after the congressional election, which will also, who the heck knows? I mean, we might have a Republican majority in the Senate and a Democrat majority in the House. I mean, a lot of people are predicting that. So a lot of unknowns, but it's like the known knowns, to harken back to a different era. You do the best you can, but you try to be prepared. Now, I'll stop there.
That's great, Paul. Appreciate it. So, Sean, you're up on the Hill. I think today you mentioned. So, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think as a 501c3, we don't do candidate elections, but I think what Paul said is especially right. You have to get ready for what's coming in 2025, and that's tremendously challenging because you don't really know what that's going to be. We try to use our time. We're sort of excited. The Senate's going to be in next week, but it's like, get out of here because we got to do some work to get ready for 2025, right? And so you can anticipate what the issues are probably going to be. You can start getting your materials together, so that kind of thing is really where we're trying to focus. I mean, we're about to sign a contract to do some focus group work to get some help talking about some issues that we anticipate being live issues for us in the next year. So it's funny because you're not actively involved in the campaigns, and suddenly for us, the issue of in vitro fertilization has a whole lot more visibility than it ever has. So we are fielding calls from candidates who want to do events and talk about stuff, and we do that. But I think it's a very important prep time because we're not out doing the campaigns because we can't.
Thanks, Sean. Ray, you have a little bit different perspective where you're really kind of at the state, local, and federal level. So it would seem a monumental task to game out all the different scenarios unless you have a serious computer over at LULAC. So like how are you addressing this?
Yeah, it's been very busy here. To give you a clue, I left the office yesterday at 11:30 p.m. We have this week, just today, we have the vice president has reached out to a bunch of Latino community leaders to have a reception or barbecue at her house. And obviously they're kind of hitting the ground running. They know that Latinos are kind of up for grabs. We're a 501c3, we're also a 501c4. So there's kind of a weird kind of, our take on the elections. I tend to speak in weird idioms, but I would say the Latino population tends to be a sleeping giant that hits snooze. When you look at voter registration, like if you look at like African Americans, Asians, whites, like voter registration is high, and then the turnout tends to be high as well. Latino voter registration might be in some areas, in some states, it's on par with like other groups, but the turnout is like abysmal. And so I think we're the sleeping giant that hits snooze. And so in states like Nevada and Arizona and these places, of course, there's a lot of push from like local members, which are under the C4 part, to try to get active, right? To get active to come out and vote. And so there's that component of things. I guess from what we're looking for, we're a nonpartisan organization. We're looking to try to activate this kind of sleeping giant. At the federal level, obviously there's certain bills that we track and there's certain measures that we're pushing. That obviously the makeup of the different committees and who controls the House, who controls the Senate. There's this bill that we are pushing for all this year and part of last year that just made its way out of Ways and Means. Now it's in Energy and Commerce. We don't know where it's going to go. But like the other thing is that there's about 13 races, gubernatorial races that are changing. And one thing that we have been tracking is since 2020, the rise of kind of anti-immigrant, anti-Latino. I mean, oftentimes they're framed as anti-immigrant. Oftentimes this kind of translates into like racial profiling. Measures of legislation, which I think is like what we've kind of charted our preliminary results is basically like something like 400% increase from 2020 to now, mostly this past year. And so that's at the municipal level and at the state level. So obviously these races for gubernatorial, and that's one, like who controls the governor's mansion in those states matters a lot. So that's one thing that we are also tracking as well. But there's a lot at stake. Obviously, it's been very busy here because we getting pulled in a million directions, trying to kind of putting out different fires, trying to respond to different requests. Just today, there was an article in the USA Today that was featuring us about kind of the Latino turnout and how that's going to affect the Harris ticket. But I mean, again, both parties are vying for this population in states like Arizona. I guess now New Mexico is even on the radar as well, but I guess Arizona and Nevada especially. So, yeah.
All right, great. So that's you definitely have a different set of challenges and I guess opportunities in the other panelists on this topic. So moving along, let's talk about the Chevron decision by the Supreme Court. Obviously, in an ambiguous situation, we put the onus on federal agencies to interpret a statute, and ironically, this is the decisions created an ambiguous situation where no one's 100% sure, other than a kind of blanket thought that the courts will be used more. But kind of early news analysis is that this could be good for some agencies, less good for for others. Maybe we'll start with Sean on this topic. We're such early days, but like, how are you approaching it? Thinking about it, if you have an interpretation, what are your early thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, we're quite worried about it, and we were particularly worried about it in conjunction with the Hippocratic Alliance, the mifepristone case. We filed an amicus in that case, and so I mean, for a healthcare group, FDA regulation is incredibly important, and I think our concern is partly it's anything else. We know how to work that system. I mean, we're not always successful, but we at least know how the thing is supposed to work. And if that changes and now everything's going to be in litigation for years, that's our biggest concern. I don't think it's coming down one side or the other. It's, the fear of a prolonged period of uncertainty. In our case, when it comes to drug and device regulation and availability, our the ability of our members to make these treatments available to their patients. And we don't want that to be coming and going and being erratic.
Paul, what are you arming your clients with? What are they thinking?
Again, it's kind of like the political situation. This thing is really roiling the waters. And you're right. I mean, the general consensus, of course, is that some of the power is being pushed out of the agencies where it has resided for a long time, and obviously towards the courts. But I also I think everybody thinks towards Congress. And so, the last many decades, we've all gotten used to, and we've all seen language in legislation that says things like, or as the secretary determines appropriate. And, Congress loves that language because it takes them off the hook from making tough decisions. So, I know a lot of folks in Congress, Republicans in particular, kind of celebrated this decision. We've already seen action from Bill Cassidy on the Senate Health Committee, sending letters to, the agencies over that he has jurisdiction over, saying, what are you going to do to make sure Congress, keeps its Article 1 legislative authority? And you've seen the House Government Oversight Committee send similar letters virtually to every federal agency, saying, what are your plans given the new reality of the overturning of the Chevron deference? So we're very much taking a wait and see attitude. I mean, I believe that Congress, as it writes legislation, will have to come to terms with the reality that, gee, they don't have the escape route that they've had for a lot of years, and they're going to have to be much more explicit about what they mean when they write legislation. So I think will still be a role for the expertise at the agencies. I just think it'll be Congress reaching out to the agencies saying, hey, we're writing this bill on this. You guys tell us, you're the experts, you tell us how to write it. So, it does what we want it to do. And hopefully for guys like me, it means that industry will be asked as well to weigh in more with their expertise. because Congress will be looking for expertise wherever it can get its hands on it, because they can't defer that anymore. So that's my general point of view, and I hate to say I'm waiting and seeing, but I am being well aware of what's going on. But I think those are a couple of potential outcomes that we're thinking about.
That's really helpful. Ray, is this entering your calculus?
Yeah, I I previously worked at Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and I came right at the time when the Azar versus Allina Health Systems case came out from the Supreme Court, and which basically kind of took everything that was in sub-regulatory guidance into going through the Administrative Procedures Act into formal regulations. So I got really cozy with the Code of Federal Regulations and kind of citing certain things. And I'm not a lawyer, and I got beaten up a lot by the Office of General Counsel for trying to draft certain regulations. But but it was an interesting process because there was some kind of feedback mechanism at the agency level, right? Like you had the notice and comment period where you had industry, you had folks that could contribute, and then you would take it into account. I mean, I don't know how many times when we had our advance notice or the rated announcement, we would spend weekends there responding back to the different queries that people had. Now this kind of shifted back to Congress, which I think, I mean, again, I think as Mr. Kelly mentioned, like the statutes really often say the secretary shall do this, secretary shall deem this, and so it kind of pivots it down to the agency. So it is something that from what we're on now that I'm in a different position now, it's like we're kind of the agitators, right? We have a legal team, we have class action lawsuit status, and we can file a claim, and take it to court. So I don't know. I'm not saying we're going to be the taking things, contesting things, but there are certain parts of this that have implications for civil rights law, like in terms of obviously when it comes to immigration, when it comes to EPA standards, education policy, a lot of this stuff. So we're tracking a lot of that, again, we are kind of a wait and see kind of thing, but we're really trying to just make sure that we have a strong legal team that if it has to go to the courts, we will be there.
Right, great. Thanks for that dual perspective. Derek, is this something that you're thinking about over at Exim Bank?
Well, I mean, I know Dr. Serrano is formerly with the CMS, so he's got an agency eye for sure. But as the only one on the panel here that I think represents an agency directly, I'll be a little careful with what I say, but I will acknowledge that when the Chevron decision was handed down, it was certainly alarming for not only myself, but almost everyone else in government that I spoke to. And we quickly turned to our legal counsel, of course, to try to understand exactly what this meant for our agency and what we could anticipate in terms of our interactions with other agencies as well. And the good news here is that we don't expect the Chevron decision to impact us at all right now, primarily because the courts have already decided that Exim, Export-Import Bank, is not entitled to deference under Chevron. We actually have a lower level of a lesser deference under a case known as Skidmore. I'm not really interested in going too deep into Skidmore right now, but given that we follow our agency's charter, we interpret based on the charter itself, and so we have a lower threshold, and so we're unconcerned at the moment with the Chevron decision, at least as it relates to our agency. But I will say, as somebody who believes in building up our institutions and is really interested in how these decisions, in the case law from these decisions impact the way government operates over the long haul, I'm very interested and concerned about Chevron.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, it's ironic over the last several decades, kind of policy expertise has flowed from the Hill into agencies, and now this most likely starts to reverse that, or at least creates more of a bilateral conversation. So let's move to artificial intelligence and kind of think about it from two perspectives. One, just using it within your own agency or within your own operation as a tool. But second, in our first question, is, in your day-to-day, is AI, important from a policy consideration? And if so, how are you thinking about it? I mean, we just had a rough day on the stock market with AI stocks yesterday, so maybe we're starting to get to the top of the disillusionment curve, but it's still important, even though the election's clearly taking the the headlines right now. Maybe Sean, we'll start with you.
Well, I think as a policy practitioner, we're not using it a whole lot. I mean, we occasionally go into Chat GPT and ask some things, kind of see what we get back, just as a way to see what the answer is. I think as an issue, when we're paying a lot of attention to AI in medicine and what the regulations around that might be going to look like. But in terms of our sort of lobbying practice, it's not playing a big role yet, and unless that's happening, behind the scenes with some of the vendors we use for legislative tracking, and they may be making a bigger use of it than I understand. But that's I push the button because I want the answer. I don't really care how they get it.
Makes sense. Dr. Serrano?
Yeah, so AI, we've kind of devoted a lot more to this issue, more than kind of we initially expected it to. I think the obviously bias and discrimination kind of built into the AI system. So we're seeing our big concern is Title VI kind of standards of like kind of protecting race and ethnicity from this. But we're seeing it like my first experience with it actually was at CMS when it was a case where two health insurance companies had they were prioritizing people to get care coordinators, and they were using some kind of algorithm that was basically determining who was going to be eligible for care coordination, and it just happened to be based on the expense of how expensive that patient was. And so what it was is that like white patients they were screened earlier, they were more expensive. So you'd have white patients getting care coordination, and then black patients who were sicker, but because they were screened later and they were in cheaper markets, they were not getting care coordination. So there was this kind of like this weird case of robotic racism, right? That was the allegation. So as we kind of dug further, it was just really more of the algorithm itself, and how it's built and who builds it, and the guardrails that are kind of needed. It's this kind of weird, brave new world that we're experiencing now, where like you're talking to AI generated credit scores, for example, that are you're seeing a new form of kind of digital redlining for certain communities. What was it, probation, like our parole boards are relying on certain scores generated by AI. So all that stuff we're tracking. Again, something goes to our legal team that kind of just tracks it a little bit further. But I mean, I think the Biden administration had this executive order that on AI, it was like a very long title. But I think that the second wave, and I think what we're trying to advocate for is the second wave of a new guidance to the agencies, to kind of track it a little bit more, to kind of protect privacy, to kind of ensure that non-discrimination. And this is something I think that every agency needs to kind of have some kind of strategy in place, and what is appropriate and what is not appropriate uses of AI. Because I think we're seeing a lot of actors using AI technologies to make determinations on certain things, or guidance at least on certain things. But oftentimes the way it's built, what goes into the algorithm, how the algorithm is based, much like the case of like the insurance companies, they didn't mean any harm. They really didn't want to have care coordination, but they used the cost of the patient, which in turn created a very racialized program. And so that's something that again we're trying to work with it. And I mean right now, because it's so new, I think we're not like trying to be antagonistic with industry or certain agencies. We're trying to work with them. I think they're actually many of them are actually kind of worried about this as well, because they want to rely on they want to use these new technologies. But if it comes at a certain cost, or if these technologies are discriminating in a certain way, then it's helpful to have a relationship with an organization that basically says, hey, wait a minute, hold on a second. Maybe you want to actually look at it this way. So there's another organization here in town, the Center for Democracy and Technology, and they're doing great work on that. So we're collaborating a little bit with them.
All right, fantastic. Paul, you're in the healthcare field. There's a lot of opportunities with AI, pattern matching, huge amounts of health data to help make determinations around people at risk for health issues. But then there's a lot of, potential harm around, data privacy and HIPAA. Like what are you advising your clients, or what are you hearing from them, given that, it's still, still in the early innings on AI and healthcare?
I think like a lot of baby boomers, I have a great deal of anxiety personally about AI. And, we all think about the Terminator coming back and taking over the world and wiping us all out, which of course is fanciful. But that anxiety is real. It exists out there. But in the healthcare field, I know there's an awful lot of optimism about the positive impact on innovation, and development of new treatments and technologies that could be helpful. So we're talking to our clients about the possibility. Again, my specialty tends to be in health policy, but we're talking to these folks about opportunities with them, about opportunities that AI represents. So we're trying to make sure it doesn't get regulated in such a way, or legislated in such a way that it would interfere with any potential innovation. But like Dr. Serrano said, there is a great concern about biases that might exist. And so we have to be very aware of that. We all exist in a political culture. And so we need to be aware of those things and who you're talking to about AI and what things are important to specific policymakers in the agencies or on Capitol Hill. And what Dr. Serrano was talking about is certainly top among those.
Thank you. I know for my organization, Leadership Connect, we use a reasonable amount of AI in helping to organize our data and go through large data sets. It's still early days, so certainly when we play around with it, when you're working with data and you get great answers 95% of the time, and a bad answer the other 5% of the time, if you can't clearly identify the 5% that's wrong, it kind of throws out the entire data set. Certainly that would be the case in the healthcare setting. So I still think a lot of this technology is pretty new, but for sure when I talk to other people in the tech community, just the notion of like what you said before, Paul, is like just reading up on it, starting to have your team experiment with it, I think is important, because it is going to be a very important technology that all of us use, or it's going to be used on us in beneficial ways. And as Dr. Serrano mentioned, some inadvertent deleterious ways, or maybe not so inadvertent. So it's obviously the election's taking a huge amount of the news headlines right now, but I'm sure AI is going to be close to the top towards the end of the year. So let's move to Dr. Serrano. You kind of touched a little bit on coalition building. That's our next topic. All of you had great examples of leveraging coalitions, working with partners at different levels. I always love the example of an opportunistic one where financial interests align with policy or political interest. Dr. Serrano just mentioned the election, and how all of a sudden you can in a way that's an opportunistic scenario to advance the causes of your organization. So maybe we'll start with you. When you think of coalition building, what are your thoughts around best practices?
Yeah, I think, the idea of kind of defining what partnership means with different organizations, I think quite often is like you have organizations approach and they want to meet and they say, okay, we want to form a partnership. And like, what does that mean? What is that like? Well, let's sign an MOU. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, well, what does that mean? And so and then of course there's people come and go from organizations, so that partnership kind of fizzles out when sometimes it's housed at that personal level. for us, like, it depends on the issue, but on issues like, for example, immigration has been a hot button issue that I think quite often it's like, I think where you're seeing a dearth of, like, or a lack of partnership, right? I think there's quite often it's the immigration debate has kind of fallen onto the immigrant community, basically saying, oh no, we're not, bad people, we're not, we're contributing to the economy. But I think it requires a deeper engagement with, like, say, the business sector to say, hey, hold on a second. If you pass this bill in Oklahoma, this is what it'll hurt your workforce. If you pass this bill in Texas, if you pass this bill in Iowa, you will see your workforce shrink this way, or it'll affect other sectors like, the childcare industry, for example. So creating those partnerships, highlighting the connection between groups that probably would never quite be in the same kind of space together. That's where I think the magic is. But I think that it requires a lot of kind of the background research and kind of just kind of showing, okay, your interests are this, our interests are this. How can we work together on this? Is it a sign-on letter? Is it a joint statement? Is it it's just a meeting? Do we send two people to the Hill? Do we send two people to the State House of Iowa, or whatever it is, to create that kind of that kind of diverse dialogue, that it's not so much just the civil rights organizations coming together to fight for civil rights. It's civil rights, business sector, whatever, faith-based organizations. A lot of these, so kind of finding those common interests between that. That's on the issue, kind of the issue constituency level, but then, like, finding coalitions even at the national or local level. I think we're pretty practical in knowing that, like, for example, we're pretty dominant in Texas, pretty dominant in New Mexico and in Arizona, but, like, in Florida and the Northeast, we're not. So we kind of partner with other organizations that have a deeper footprint. So we work with those organizations. So that coalition building sometimes kind of looks at, like, the kind of the expertise or the depth of knowledge or the depth of experience, and how we can kind of piggyback on the work that the other organizations are doing, and what we can add, or where we can provide added value. So that's kind of but it is a work in progress. I think, obviously, I personally think, I don't think we've done, on the immigration debate, I don't think we've done a very good job at it. I think I wouldn't say LULAC, but I should say in general, I think it's quite often been so isolated. It's been kind of put in the frame of, like, it's kind of left the question of immigration on its own. Like, is the immigrants defending themselves, saying, like, and there's no real question of, like, there's no real dialogue on what's the demand for immigrant labor, what is the kind of the push factors, what are the pull factors, like, how do we benefit, what are the disadvantages, like, that kind of dialogue that kind of requires more interaction across industries, basically, not just nonprofit, but, like, business, faith-based, other institutions.
Right. Definitely makes sense. Sean, what are your thoughts? In our prep calls, you also talked about having an end date on some coalitions, which often, gets ignored in these conversations.
I think coalitions are tremendously important. I mean, I continue to believe that politics is an additive business, and I think that's true not just in electoral politics, but in legislative politics as well. And so, I mean, sometimes I think my board probably thinks I'm spending all my time, like, talking to the speaker or something. And I'm like, in reality, I'm mostly talking to other lobbyists and staff people, and because that's how you get things done. But I think people underestimate how much time lobbyists spend talking to each other to organize things. And every association has its own sandbox, right? So people have their own. You want to come together and get the synergy from that and the power of that. But people all want to have different things. So coalition management can be a little bit tricky. I've actually got a call when this gets done with some folks that are unhappy with some actions we took. So sometimes you got to smooth stuff like that out. So I do think when you form coalitions, you need to be clear about what the goal is. And I think it's important when you meet that goal to put the coalition to bed. Mission creep is a real thing. Earlier in my career, I put together a really nice coalition, 200 groups. We had a lot of money. We won and we disbanded. And that's sort of unusual. So I like talking about it. But and I would maybe ask Derek in his previous role as an elected legislator. I mean, right, you like coalitions because they're efficient, right, and let you give out your groups at once. But balancing the demands of a million interest groups can be pretty tricky. So hopefully coalitions help with that. That's why we do them.
Great perspective, Sean. Derek, your name checked, and maybe both perspectives. I know we talked a little bit about you have a perspective on international coalitions given XM's mandate, but the legislative one would be interesting as well.
Well, running for office, you've got to build a coalition to get you across the finish line, right? And so I would say that, in electoral politics, a coalition is obviously essential, but it's super fragile. And so if we have an expiration date on the election day itself, you have to imagine that once you start making hard calls in the job itself, you're going to start seeing folks drop from your coalition because you're going to upset somebody over here or somebody over here, right? And so as an elected official, I think being super mindful about where, the pieces of your coalition, where they're fragile, where they're strong. And as you make the tough calls and you start losing folks, going back and, bringing them back into the fold at some level and doing that well in advance of the next election, right? That way it doesn't seem like you're just jockeying for support to stay in power, for example. But that's the old life, right? That's my old hat. What I would say in terms of the federal process, right? I mentioned our charter once or twice already in this conversation, and I've been thinking about coalitions quite a bit as we gear up for the reauthorization process in 2026. Now, this is a legislative effort that we're pushing, of course. This needs to be passed out of both chambers and, of course, get a signature from the president. So that's obviously my primary focus in terms of building a coalition. How do I get the right members of Congress on board well in advance so that we can get the job done, so to speak. And so in order to get there, I'm gaming out, where are the bits of power that have influence over the key members of Congress, right? And so what does the coalition look like? Well, I look back to the previous coalition from 2019. We had a different administration and it was pre-COVID, so it was a much different ordeal back then. But it's about, getting the band back together, so to speak, right? How do I get, GE and John Deere and Westinghouse? How do I get Regions Bank and, US Bank and JP Morgan back? How do I get the mayors and the governors to, pass a resolution within their associations supporting our agency? Because that's all bottom up energy that can help me as I'm engaging with, Sherrod Brown or Tim Scott, pointing to these key, leaders that are a part of their coalition, right? And so that's a big part of it. Of course, turning to the American Manufacturing Association, where, our job as the export credit agency of American government is to make sure that we're putting American goods in action around the world. So, the manufacturers are really key. But of course, organized labor is an important element and something that's really close to my heart. So really trying to activate, the labor movement. And then, of course, the Chamber of Commerce. So, it's sort of a ragtag group. But when we come together around a specific goal, which is getting our agency reauthorized, that automatically has an expiration date, right? So it's sort of built into the mission of organizing ourselves.
Excellent. Great perspective. Paul, maybe kind of same question, but also, there's a term, the coalition of the willing. And, when you think about coalitions, even if there's someone out there that seems like, the best potential coalition partner for one of your clients, maybe they're not always willing, or they have the team within that organization to partner. Like kind of same topic about coalition partners, but if there's an additional perspective you have on their willingness and their energy behind participating in that coalition, because Derek's conversation made me think of that.
I'd agree with all these gentlemen. I mean, it's absolutely critical, and sort of my jargony political science term is, finding third-party validation, and that's what it's all about. And you reach out to the groups who, like you say, are willing to help you. And sometimes I think it's really important to keep an open mind, because the oldest adage in politics is that politics makes for strange bedfellows, and I think that's true for legislative politics, as Sean was saying. It's like I was with the Association of Chain Drugstores for many years, and our members, the drugstores, they hate the pharmacy benefit managers, hate them with a passion. And so most of the time, most of my time was spent fighting them tooth and nail. But there was an issue during the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, on Medicaid reimbursement for drugs, where we saw eye to eye. And so we formed an ad hoc coalition with them and a couple other groups, and we won, and it disbanded, and we went back to fighting each other tooth and nail. So it's, I think it's very important to keep an open mind and not discount anyone. I know that's harder for groups that are sort of politically aligned and more partisan. But I always look for those opportunities and advise my clients to keep a very open mind, and let's figure out where you might find common ground, because, if you can find somebody who'll sing off the same sheet of music with you, that's golden.
And Paul, was there any reticence, just given the history with the PBMs, where when you reached out, was there personal animosity amongst any of them, or everyone's a professional and they recognize that you represent a certain organization and therefore a certain position, and everyone's a professional and can separate their own personal feelings from something?
I think that's a really good question, and in that case, we're working within a trade association. It was easier, trade association exec to other trade association exec, because we kind of got it. Because like you said, we're professionals. We know we're trying to get a job done, but we had to do some internal lobbying of our members to say, hey, we're working with the PBMs. We know you hate them, but on this issue, we're aligned. So let's work with them where we can.
All right. Excellent. So we'll have kind of extend the topic, but really look at it from kind of a large organization perspective. And maybe we'll just have, Dr. Serrano answer this one, because, LULAC, you had mentioned just the pure reach of the organization with, hundreds of local chapters, 140,000 members, a lot of which are volunteers. How do you approach just organizing, the policy priorities, harnessing, the energy of that group, sleeping giant on snooze. So how do you get the alarm turned on, I guess would be the example. It was a very, I think, great perspective for those on the call today who are, involved, large, complex organizations.
Yeah, so it's tough because it's an old organization too. So there's definitely councils that have been around, and they have different numbers, like LULAC Council 1, and then it goes all the way up to LULAC Council, 1875 or something like this. And so they're and each council has its own little culture, right? And they have their own priorities. And of course so when they form a state chapter, they have, their, one area might be police brutality, the other area might be immigration, the other one might be workforce empowerment, job creation, whatever it is. They all have their certain areas that they focus on. So we have a national convention every year. They kind of vote, create a platform, that they vote on certain measures that they kind of want to highlight. They really kind of come in with a draft, what they want to push forward. That becomes a policy platform that kind of is our kind of book that we kind of use for the next 2-3 years. From that, our job here at the national office is to operationalize that, to try to make sure that we're at the national level, we're supporting the state and local levels. They're still free to do their own thing. They still can do certain things, but there's still certain priorities that we're trying to focus on. It's not always easy. It's a lot of herding of cats. It's a lot of this is where things are moving in a certain direction. Maybe you want to put this on your flag, this on your radar, because a lot of the folks they're volunteers, so they're not going to be attentive to the latest, I don't know, notice and comment period from whatever agency, or the latest grant that's just been issued by the Department of Labor or whatever. They're not really attuned to that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of it. Our job is to try to just kind of break it down to them and say, this might be something you want to put on your radar. So but again, it's just kind of herding cats, aligning things, kind of setting certain timelines, a strategic plan to say, okay, by this month we're trying to aim for this, or this month we're trying to aim for that, and kind of moving everybody in a common direction. But it is tough. And then and even within the council and state levels, there's certain kind of entrepreneurs, right? There's folks that are really, they want to champion a certain policy, and they really want to make that policy the national policy, the only policy, and they want to push that forward. And so they have a certain agenda. So it's to kind of wheel them back into like, well, hold on a second, like we can't really, we can't, we'll address it, but we really have to kind of stay consistent to what we pledged ourselves to be. Otherwise, we're just going to go into this wacky kind of mission creep where we're targeting everything. We're not really doing anything. So, but again, it's a lot easier said than done.
That's great insight. So let's turn to our next topic. We've kind of covered a couple of things throughout the dialogue. And Derek, you had mentioned, getting the gang back together, from a coalition perspective, which I think is a great example for the next topic, which is turnover, where getting the gang back together, that gang probably, the organizations exist, but the individuals that were the point people in those organizations, however many years ago, have probably changed, because we track, staff and executive, turnover. And I'm always amazed that, policy positions typically turn over after, 21 months. It puts a lot of stress on organizations just to track that, build relationships anew. I know there's a great line of like, you need to build the relationship before you actually need it. Derek, like, how do you, you joined Exim Bank, you're coming in fresh, like, now I'm sure you're dealing with, turnover after you've been there for a little while. Like, what are your best practices for just addressing turnover, and then even from a process point of view, how you organize, your team to, to capitalize on it?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And, I know that a lot of folks within the federal system are really, acutely aware of the challenges with personnel these days. A lot of folks are eligible for retirement. And then, of course, you have your normal attrition, like you mentioned, 21 months or so on average. And so, turnover and your personnel is something you have to factor into whether or not you can be successful on whatever endeavor you're embarking on. And so, I would say that joining the federal government, it took me a solid, probably 10 weeks or so to really feel like I could wrap my arms around what the job itself is, probably longer, to be honest. But, it took about 2 months or so to really get my arms around, what success in the job itself might look like. And so, I think for me, it not only did it take a moment to onboard myself, I've learned to be quite patient with new folks as I've been bringing them in. I will say that I joined the administration, I joined this agency, and a team that needed to be built. So I've been building our congressional affairs and intergovernmental team over the last year or so. And we're still understaffed. I'm surprised, coming from the private sector. I have a background in entrepreneurship and small business, and so in my restaurant, if you need a server or you need a cook, you hire them right in the moment. In the federal government, it's not so simple, right? So we posted a job back in April. That person isn't onboarding until September. So I think we are up against some really unique challenges just because of the federal government's process and sort of behind the scenes efforts to ensure quality and make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. It's a challenge as a political appointee because at the end of the day, I have to imagine that this job itself for me has an expiration date. And so how do I walk away from this role with the confidence that I left the role in a better position, right? And that the team, the career staff that will be around no matter who's president, right? That those folks not only accomplished a fair amount with my leadership, but are in a better position after I leave and are ready to continue on doing the work. And so, this is an ongoing challenge. Try to institutionalize all of our processes and procedures. Obviously, try to bring folks from other divisions into major work products that we're moving through the process, so that if somebody steps aside, I can go to the policy shop down the hall or the attorneys down the hall and they have at least some sense of what was going on to keep it moving in case, I get hit by a bus and don't come into work the next day, right? And so, for me, it's always about just sort of trying to spread the love in terms of the workflow.
Awesome, great answer. And then Sean, we'll finish up with you. Thinking of turnover from an external perspective, so the kind of your Hill contacts and coalition partners and members that are important to the function of your organization.
I think part of it goes back to something I said earlier, which is you got to invest the time now into, so you have the tools and materials that you will need and that will be useful to those people, right? The fundamental job of a lobbyist is make yourself useful to the people whose decisions you're trying to influence. And if you can get them the good information and you can anticipate what the questions are going to have and have those answers ready in a form they can digest, then you're going to be ready to handle those transitions, because those turnovers happen all the time. I mean, it seems to me like every time we send an e-blast out to the healthcare LAs on the Hill, we get about 45 saying, well, they're not doing healthcare for us anymore. Here's who's doing it, right? So it's useful to do that just to find that out. But the turnover is so fast, you have to have sort of materials and know that they're going to be useful, because you're going to have new people every single day.
Excellent, great advice. So we'll leave it there. So we'll be doing a write-up of best practices from this session, sending it out to the webinar registrants in the next couple of days. Really want to thank our speakers for devoting their time today for the call and the prep. It was an awesome discussion, and wish everyone best of luck for the rest of the year. So thanks to Derek, Dr. Serrano, Paul, Sean, thanks so much, and we'll end it here.
Thank you so much.
Cheers all.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye-bye.